So the Rose Basketball Club have played in 2 games, and it's not looking good for Lexie Hall. Picture this: a star player traded with high hopes now warming the bench for just 90 seconds a game. When Caitlin Clark heard about Lexie Hall's situation with the Rose Basketball Club, her reaction was nothing short of explosive. Here's what went down. Lexie Hall's current predicament with the Rose Basketball Club has sparked outrage, particularly from WNBA sensation Caitlin Clark, and trust me, this story has more layers than an onion. Let's set the scene. The Rose Basketball Club has played 2 games so far, and for Lexie Hall, these games have been nothing short of a nightmare. We're talking about a grand total of just 8 minutes of playing time across both matches. But here's the kicker: it's not because she's playing poorly. In fact, she's been solid in the limited time she's had on the court. It's like having a Ferrari and keeping it in the garage. Now you might be wondering, what's the real story here? Well, it's a classic case of a square peg in a round hole. The Rose's playing style is built around 2 shot-creating guards taking turns to make plays. They run a system where players need to create their own shots. And that's where Hall's struggles begin. It's like being the only vegetarian at a steakhouse. You might be great at what you do, but you're in the wrong place. Think about the Rose's current lineup. You've got Chelsea Gray, who's basically a magician with the ball, sometimes throwing passes that make you wonder if she's actually trying to pass or just freestyling. Brittany Sykes and Kat Copper are their 2 all-players who can create their own shots like artists painting on a blank canvas. Then there's Air Stevens and Angel Reese, whose primary jobs are to roll and seal in pick-and-roll situations. It's a very specific system, like a well-oiled machine, where every part has its purpose. Let's break down what happened in their recent game. Chelsea Gray had 6 assists but also 3 turnovers. Some of those behind-the-back moves were so wild, even her teammates looked surprised. It's like watching a jazz musician. You're never quite sure if the next note is intentional or improvised. The team only attempted 10 three-pointers total, which in modern basketball is like going to a party and barely touching the snack table. The frustration gets even more real when you look at Hall's journey. She came from a situation with Christy Sides coaching where she had to prove herself day in and day out. Eventually she earned her stripes and was playing 30 minutes per game, helping her team improve. Now she's barely seeing enough court time to break a sweat. It's like finally getting your driver's license, only to have your car taken away. What's particularly interesting is how the Rose run their offense. Everything, and I mean everything, goes through their high pick and roll system. Whether it starts with a handoff, a cut, or some other action, it all leads to the same place: a high screen and someone trying to get to the basket. For Hull, who's more comfortable spotting up for threes and playing lockdown defense, it's like being asked to speak a foreign language without any lessons. The trade that brought Hull to the Rose is looking more and more like a miscalculation. The Kate Martin for Lexie Hull swap. Many experts are now saying Hull would have been better off with the LA team. Why? Because their style of play would have complemented her strengths better. It's like trading a surfer to a ski team. Sure, they're both athletes, but the skills don't quite translate. Let's talk about what Hull actually brings to the table. She's a 3-and-D specialist, which in most modern basketball teams is like having a golden ticket. She can knock down open threes and play tough defense. In her limited minutes, she's shown exactly that. She came in full court press. The opposing team's best guard did a solid job, didn't turn the ball over, and even hit a 3. But in the Rose's system, that's like having a great parallel parking skill in a town with only pull-through spots. The contrast in playing styles becomes even more apparent when you look at other teams. Take the Mist, for example. Their whole game plan is about quick passing and shooting as much as possible. It's basketball at its most exciting: pass, 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 shoot. Put Hull on that team, and she'd probably thrive like a fish finally being put back in water. But the Rose, they're all about that half-court offense, grinding it out possession by possession. This situation has created a real conundrum for Hull. She's essentially caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, she's making good money, somewhere between $100,000 to $250,000, and getting to be part of a professional team. On the other hand, she's not getting the opportunity to showcase her skills or develop her game. It's like being paid to be a backup singer, but never getting to hold the microphone. The Rose's offensive strategy is particularly challenging for someone with Hull's skill set. When they do shoot threes, which isn't often, they're almost always off screens with players pulling up. They don't do spot-up threes, which is Hull's specialty. It's like having a great three-point shooter, but running an offense from the 1990s. What makes this situation even more fascinating is the team's overall approach to offense. In their recent game, they actually shot 9 fewer shots than their opponents, even with several offensive rebounds. That's not just a coincidence, it's a deliberate style choice. They're not trying to get into a shooting match with anyone. They want to control the tempo, work the ball inside, and win in the trenches. For a player like Hull, who could thrive in a more up-tempo shooting-friendly system, it's like being a speedboat in a canal. The defensive end is where things get particularly ironic. Hull is actually doing everything right when she gets her chances. She's showing she can defend at a high level even against top opposition, but in the Rose's system, being a good defender isn't enough. You need to be able to create your own shot on the other end. It's like being a great goalkeeper, but being required to score goals too. This brings us to an interesting point about player development and team building. The Rose clearly have their system, and they're sticking to it, But at what point does a team need to consider adapting their style to make use of all their talent, or is it entirely on the players to adapt these? Are questions that coaches in general, managers grapple with all the time, but rarely do we see such a clear example of this dilemma playing out in real time. What really got people talking was Caitlin Clark's reaction to this whole situation. When Clark saw how Hull was being utilized, or rather not utilized, she couldn't hold back her frustration, and honestly, who can blame her, as someone who's revolutionized college basketball with her own unique playing style. Clark understands better than most the importance of being in a system that maximizes your strengths. The thing about professional basketball that often gets overlooked is how much team fit matters. You can be an incredible player if you're in the wrong system. It's like trying to run underwater. This is exactly what we're seeing with Hull. Right now, she's got the skills. That's not up for debate. She's shown it before with the Fever, especially during that crucial 15-game stretch post-Olympics, where she really found her rhythm. Speaking of the Fever, let's talk about Hull's time there. She was getting DNPs, did not play regularly, but when she did get her chance, she showed flashes of what she could do. The difference is that even those DNPs felt different from what's happening now. At least then it was about waiting for her opportunity. Now she's getting on the court just long enough to remind everyone she exists before being yanked back to the bench. The numbers from the Rose's recent games tell an interesting story. Every other player on the team scored in double digits except Hull, who played what felt like a blink. And you'll miss it. 90 seconds. That's not even enough time to get your jersey sweaty. And here's the thing, in those 90 seconds, she did everything right. Full court pressed, played solid defense, didn't make mistakes. But in the Rose's system, that's like bringing a calculator to an essay contest. One of the most frustrating aspects of this situation is watching the Rose's offensive sets. They run these two-guard actions where Chelsea Gray and their other ball handlers take turns creating. It's like a dance where everyone knows the steps except Hull, not because she can't dance, but because they're doing the tango and she's trained in ballet. Both are valid forms of dance, but they require different skills. Let's talk about Chelsea Gray for a moment, because her style of play really illustrates why Hull is struggling to find minutes. Gray is out there throwing passes that sometimes look like they're meant for players in the third row. 6 assists and 3 turnovers might not look terrible on paper, but watching the game you can see how chaotic it gets. Some of those behind-the-back passes are so unexpected, even her teammates look surprised. In a system like that, being a reliable spot-up shooter almost becomes a liability rather than an asset. The Rose's approach to three-point shooting is particularly telling. 10 three-point attempts as a team that's incredibly low in modern basketball, and when they do shoot threes, they're almost always off the dribble or coming off screens. The catch-and-shoot opportunities that Hull thrives on, they're about as rare as a snow day in summer. The team's whole offensive philosophy seems to be why shoot from outside when we can get inside. This brings us to an interesting comparison with other teams in the league. Take the Mist, for example. Their style is completely different. It's all about quick ball movement, finding the open shooter, and letting it fly. Put Hull on that team, and suddenly she's getting 4 or 5 open looks per quarter. But with the Rose, she's lucky if she sees 1 good look per game, and that's assuming she's even on the court long enough to get it. There's also the defensive aspect to consider. Hull is actually a pretty good defender. She's shown she can guard the opponent's best players. She's smart about positioning, and she doesn't make many mistakes. But in the Rose's system, being a good defender isn't enough. You need to be able to create your own shot on offense, and that's just not Hull's game. Thank you so much.